The email came late on a quiet Thursday afternoon, landing in Darius Bell's inbox with the sterile formality of a corporate memo. The subject line read simply, "The Morning Exchange, Guest Invitation." Darius stared at it for a long second, his gut tightening before he even clicked it open. The Morning Exchange wasn't just any talk show. It was one of the highest-rated morning programs in the country, watched by millions, capable of catapulting or crushing someone's public image in a single broadcast. And now they wanted him, Darius Bell, the black tech CEO who had just stunned the defense industry by securing a $200 million contract, outbidding corporate giants with names carved into the foundations of Silicon Valley. But as he sat back in his chair, the initial thrill dulled into something colder. Suspicion. He had seen this movie before. Black success stories paraded across glossy screens whenever diversity became a trending topic, only to be scrutinized, picked apart, and quietly discarded once the camera stopped rolling. It was a familiar dance. Applause first, interrogation later. Darius knew that acceptance in these spaces often came with invisible strings. He knew better than to think they just wanted to celebrate him. From across the room, Tasha, his longtime assistant and closest advisor, caught the shift in his expression. "You sure you want to do this?" she asked, her voice low, wary. "You know how these shows work. They love building you up, right before they tear you down." Darius drummed his fingers against the polished oak of his desk, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of Innovis headquarters. Beyond the glass, the Los Angeles skyline shimmered under a blood-orange sunset, beautiful and indifferent. He weighed the risks. National exposure could be a game-changer, a chance to tell his story his way. But it could also be a setup, a calculated ambush dressed in soft lighting and polite smiles. "I'll handle it," he said finally, his voice even, but inside the warning bells were deafening. This wasn't just another interview. This was a stage, and every move on it would be judged, twisted, replayed. Still, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever game they thought they were playing, they were dealing with someone who had spent his whole life learning to survive rigged tables. Tasha sighed, shaking her head with a mix of pride and exasperation. "Just promise me you won't let them bait you," she said. Darius smiled, a small, knowing smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "They'll try," he said, "but I'm not walking into their trap. I'm bringing my own board." As he hit reply and typed a short, formal acceptance, a current of adrenaline hummed under his skin. The invitation was accepted, the stage was set, and deep down, Darius Bell knew, one way or another, this would be a morning America would not forget. The morning of the interview, Darius Bell pulled into the underground lot of KXNT Studios, his sleek black sedan slicing through the early haze of Los Angeles. He stepped out, the soles of his polished shoes clicking against the concrete, his heart steady but his instincts razor sharp. The security guard barely glanced at his ID before waving him through. A small thing, but Darius noticed. Everything, today, would matter. Inside, the studio buzzed with a mechanical, light, impersonal efficiency. No warm greetings, no smiles, no one rushing over to make him feel at ease. Instead, a young producer in jeans and a headset appeared at his side, eyes never quite meeting his. "Mr. Bell, thanks for coming. We'll mic you up in 5. Her tone was clipped, rehearsed, transactional, as if he were just another prop to be wheeled out and rolled away when they were done. Darius followed her down a sterile hallway lined with framed photos of smiling hosts and celebrity guests, each one more polished than the last. The green room, when he entered, was chillingly cold, both in temperature and in spirit. The couch was stiff, the coffee stale, the silence deafening. On the wall, a flat-screen monitor showed the live feed of the show in progress, a segment on celebrity scandals, complete with canned laughter and flashing headlines. He sat, adjusting the cuffs of his navy suit, breathing slow and even. But as he waited, the unease thickened. The assistant who came to apply his makeup worked with swift, mechanical indifference, dusting his skin with powder while avoiding eye contact, muttering instructions under her breath. He was a checklist item, nothing more. The screen flickered again. A bold graphic splashed across. Coming up next, the black tech boom, talent or special treatment? Darius's jaw tightened. So that was the setup. Not a celebration of innovation, not a story about building a world-class company from nothing. No, It was the old insinuation, dressed up in pastel colors and soft lighting. Did you really earn this? In that moment, sitting in the too bright green room, Darius realized exactly what this was. It wasn't an interview, it was a trial, and he was expected to defend his existence in front of an invisible jury. America. The door creaked open. Another producer leaned in, earpiece in place. "You're on deck, Mr. Bell. Let's go." Darius rose, smoothing his jacket, every movement deliberate, controlled. As he followed the producer toward the set, past buzzing cameras and murmuring crew, he felt the weight of the moment settle onto his shoulders. He had faced harder things. He had fought bigger battles. But somehow, walking into that studio felt heavier than any boardroom he had ever commanded. They thought they were leading a lamb to slaughter. But Darius Bell wasn't a lamb. He was the fire they hadn't prepared for. The set of the morning exchange was crafted to deceive. Soft blues, warm golds, a glass coffee table gleaming under studio lights designed to lull viewers into a sense of comfort. But Darius Bell saw through it the moment he stepped onto the stage. Cameras hovered like mechanical vultures, their lenses cold and unblinking. And across from him, seated with perfect poise, was Madeline Royce, the network's star anchor, a master of the art of disarming smiles and sharpened questions. Madeline's expression was polished, her voice velvet smooth as she welcomed him. "Darius Bell," she purred, "CEO of Innovis. A true American success story." She smiled, but the warmth never reached her calculating eyes. Darius offered a polite nod, masking the coiled steel inside him. "Appreciate you having me." The first few minutes unfolded exactly as he expected, praise cloaked in faux admiration. Madeline marveled at his recent $200 million government contract win, her voice dripping with congratulatory awe. Darius answered calmly, his words measured, his body language steady. But he knew the storm was gathering just beyond the lights. Then came the pivot, subtle, surgical. Madeline crossed her legs, flipping casually through her cue cards. Her next words floated out, light as a feather and sharp as a blade. "Some industry experts," she said, voice syrupy sweet, suggest that Innovis's success may have been helped by federal diversity initiatives. That perhaps it wasn't solely about outperforming competitors, but about agencies seeking to meet diversity quotas. There it was, the real interview. A slow burn ignited in Darius's chest, but he didn't flinch. He had known this moment would come, the moment when his sweat, his sacrifice, his 20 years of grinding through closed doors and impossible odds would be reduced to a checkmark in someone's diversity report. He let a beat of silence stretch between them, letting the implication linger in the air like smoke. Then, in a voice smooth as silk but hard as stone, he answered, "It's funny. When a black entrepreneur wins, it's special treatment. But when the same old legacy firms, run by the same families for generations, land the deals, no one questions merit." A subtle tension crackled through the studio. Off-camera producers shifted nervously. Madeline's smile tightened, but she pressed forward, her journalistic instincts sharpening. "So you're saying race played no role at all in your success?" Darius chuckled softly, the sound low and knowing. He leaned in just slightly, locking eyes with her. When SpaceX won NASA contracts, no one said Elon Musk was fulfilling a diversity quota. When Blue Origin signed government deals, nobody wondered about Jeff Bezos' background. Funny how those questions only seem to come up when the CEO looks like me. The air shifted palpably. Even the cameras seemed to lean in closer, sensing the brewing collision. Madeline blinked once, her fingers twitching slightly on her cue cards. She hadn't expected him to come armed, not with anger, but with the quiet, irrefutable power of truth. And Darius Bell wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The studio lights blazed hotter now, though the temperature in the room hadn't changed. Darius Bell could feel it, the shift. The moment when the interview peeled back its friendly disguise and revealed what it truly was. A challenge, a gauntlet thrown at his feet. Madeline Royce sat across from him, her smile tight, her voice carefully neutral. "Surely," she said, tilting her head in mock curiosity, "you had help along the way. A mentor, a special program, something that gave you that extra push?" Her words hung in the air like smoke, implying what she dared not say aloud. "You couldn't have done this on your own." Darius leaned back slightly, the very image of calm, though inside him a storm gathered strength. He exhaled once, steady and slow, before answering. "You're right," he said, voice even. I had help. Madeline's eyebrows lifted as if she had scored a point. Help, Darius continued, in the form of working 3 jobs while earning my engineering degree. Help in the form of sleeping in my office because I couldn't afford rent while building my first prototype. Help in the form of every door slammed in my face that taught me how to build my own. The studio grew quieter. Even the camera operators, seasoned professionals trained to tune out emotion, seemed frozen behind their lenses. Darius wasn't speaking louder. He didn't need to. His words carried the weight of a truth too often ignored. You see, he said, leaning forward now, his voice low but steady, some people inherit a ladder. They start halfway up and call it climbing. People like me, we're handed a shovel and told to dig our way out. Madeline shifted in her seat, a flicker of unease flashing across her polished expression. But she pressed on. Some might argue that today's landscape is more open than ever for minority entrepreneurs, that programs exist now that didn't before. Darius chuckled quietly, a sound without mirth. You know what's funny? When a black entrepreneur succeeds, people rush to ask what program helped us. But nobody asks which country club connection funded a white startup. Nobody asks what old money deal got them in the door. Success isn't handed out in some merit-based lottery. It's still a rigged game. He paused, letting the truth sink its claws into the silence. Black entrepreneurs have to be twice as good, twice as prepared, twice as relentless, just to be given half the chance. The words cracked through the studio like a whip, slicing through the careful decorum of the segment. Madeline opened her mouth, perhaps to pivot, perhaps to salvage. But there was no pulling the narrative back now, because for once the truth wasn't whispered in back rooms. It was being spoken live in front of millions. And it wasn't polished or softened for anyone's comfort. It was raw. It was real. And Darius Bell wasn't just answering questions anymore. He was tearing down the entire game board and daring America to look at the pieces. The air inside the studio had turned electric, thick with an invisible charge. Every glance, every shallow breath seemed magnified under the unforgiving heat of the cameras. But Darius Bell wasn't rattled. No, he was steady, anchored like a mountain in a brewing storm. Across from him, Madeline Royce adjusted in her chair, masking her growing unease beneath a veneer of polished professionalism. She wasn't used to losing control of an interview, and certainly not to someone who refused to play by the unspoken rules. Be grateful, be agreeable, be small. Madeline leaned forward, voice crisp. Let's address perception, Darius. Some people feel that black entrepreneurs today get too much attention, that stories like yours overshadow countless hardworking business owners who don't receive the same media coverage. It was a calculated move. Shift the narrative. Cast doubt not on his work, but on his right to be seen. Darius gave a slow, incredulous shake of his head, a bitter smile curving his lips. So now the problem, he said, voice cutting through the studio silence, is that we get too much attention? He let the question hang there, daring her to answer. She didn't. You're telling me, he continued, voice building with quiet power, in a world where 90% of Fortune 500 CEOs are white men, where venture capital funding overwhelmingly flows to white-owned startups, where boardrooms are still closed rooms to people who look like me, we're the ones getting too much press? Madeline's smile tightened, the muscles around her eyes betraying the strain. Darius wasn't done. Not even close. He leaned in, elbows resting lightly on his knees, voice dropping into a forceful whisper that felt more dangerous than any shout. You want to talk about fairness? Fine. Let's talk. A mediocre white man can fail upwards in this country, bankrupt a company, lay off thousands, and still land another top job. Meanwhile, a brilliant black entrepreneur gets one bad quarter, and it's proof we were never ready for leadership. Behind the cameras, a producer muttered a curse under their breath. They could feel it too. The interview had slipped beyond their control, and it wasn't coming back. Madeline tried to regain footing, tried to soften the blow. Surely, Darius, success today is about hard work, not race. But Darius cut through the platitudes like a blade through silk. People love to believe in fairy tales, he said, locking eyes with her, when they're the ones living the dream. The silence that followed was cavernous, heavy, a silence born not of confusion, but of recognition, of a truth too sharp, too real to be comfortably ignored. In that moment, Darius Bell was no longer a guest on a morning show. He was a force, raw, undeniable, and utterly unafraid. And America, whether it liked it or not, was finally listening. For a moment, the studio was suspended in a strange kind of stillness. The hum of the lights, the whir of the cameras, all of it faded, eclipsed by the weight of the words hanging in the air. Darius Bell sat motionless, his frame calm but coiled with energy, eyes never leaving Madeline Royce's carefully composed face. Madeline, sensing the brewing impact, made one last attempt to steer the conversation back into safer waters. She leaned forward slightly, softening her tone. "But Darius," she said almost gently, "doesn't your own success prove that the system isn't as broken as some say? That maybe the outrage is exaggerated?" It was meant to sound reasonable, persuasive. A rope thrown across a chasm, asking him to climb back into the narrative they had prepared for him. Instead, Darius chuckled, low, almost sorrowful, and shook his head. His voice, when it came, was steady, but it carried a gravity that pulled every soul in the studio closer. "You know," he said, "people love to point to one person who makes it out and say, 'See, it's not that bad.'" He paused, letting the audience lean into the silence. "But let me ask you something," Darius continued, voice deepening. "If one person climbs out of a burning building, do you point at them and say, 'See, the fire wasn't that bad'?" The room froze. It wasn't just the cameras that captured the moment. It was the air itself, crystallized around the raw, unvarnished truth of it. Darius didn't blink, didn't waver. He pressed on, his words deliberate, each one a hammer blow to the brittle facade of denial. "The fact that I made it," he said, "doesn't mean the system isn't broken. It just means I fought like hell to survive it." Across the country, televisions flickered with the image of him sitting there, composed, resolute, utterly refusing to be packaged into a feel-good success story to soothe guilty consciences. In the control room, producers stared at the monitors, unsure whether to cut to commercial to intervene. But something bigger was happening, something they couldn't interrupt without exposing themselves. On set, Madeline Royce opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Not because she didn't have a scripted line ready, she always did, but because in that moment, no script could compete with the truth Darius had just laid bare. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't awkward. It was reverent. The kind of silence reserved for witnessing something undeniable, something that shifted the ground beneath your feet. In that brief, searing moment, Darius Bell didn't just win an argument. He cracked open a conversation that had been sealed shut for generations. And once opened, there was no putting it back. America wasn't just watching anymore. America was listening. By the time Darius Bell walked out of the studio and into the glaring California sun, the world had already begun to shift. His phone buzzed violently in his pocket, a constant hum of texts, calls, and notifications that refused to be ignored. He slid into the backseat of his car, pulled the door shut, and for a moment simply sat there, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. In the first hour, the clip spread like wildfire across social media. Darius Bell exposes the truth about American meritocracy. He said what no one else dared. This man just made history on live television. Underneath those headlines, comments exploded, some lifting him up, others tearing him down. Finally, someone said it out loud, respect. Playing the victim again. Cry me a river. Darius Bell just gave the speech of a generation. This is why people don't want to hire activists. Cable news anchors scrambled for hot takes. CNN called it a reckoning long overdue. Fox News labeled it another entitled CEO whining about success. Business Insider published an op-ed titled, "What Darius Bell's Viral Interview Reveals About Race and Business in America." In the chaos, Darius's name trended worldwide, not just among tech enthusiasts or political junkies, but across every platform, every conversation. He had become a symbol, but what he symbolized depended on who you asked. In boardrooms, some executives quietly praised his bravery, even as they drafted emails reconsidering partnerships. In activist circles, he was hailed as a modern-day truth-teller, a voice too powerful to be ignored. And in the darker corners of the internet, the threats began to fester. Anonymous emails, veiled warnings, the kind of ugly backlash that always lurked just beneath the surface. Tasha, his assistant, called him as he stared out the window at the city skyline. Her voice crackled with a mix of awe and exhaustion. "You realize you just set the entire country on fire, right?" Darius chuckled dryly. "Not exactly my plan." "Well," she said, scrolling through a flood of incoming emails, "investors are reaching out like crazy. Everyone suddenly wants to work with us." He smiled grimly. "Funny how that works." But it wasn't all opportunity. One longtime corporate partner abruptly reevaluated their commitment. A major conference rescinded an invitation he had received months ago. And in front of Innova's headquarters, a nondescript package was found. Inside, a single sheet of paper, one word written in thick black ink: "Enough." Darius rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar sting of reality settling in. Speaking the truth came with a price, and now he was paying it. But he also knew something else, something deeper. This wasn't just backlash. It was proof that he had struck a nerve so raw, so undeniable, that even those desperate to silence him couldn't look away. He hadn't just gone viral. He had sparked a fire no one could put out. And in the smoldering aftermath, Darius Bell understood. This was no longer just about him. It was about everything he stood for. And he wasn't backing down. The next 48 hours felt like a storm Darius Bell could not outrun. A storm he had summoned with nothing more than truth and courage. On one side, opportunity rained down in torrents. Emails from investors flooded in, some from firms that had once ghosted him without a second glance. Venture capitalists who had previously dismissed Innovis as too niche now lined up, eager to associate their portfolios with a man who had become a symbol of defiance. News outlets clamored for exclusive interviews. Book publishers dangled lucrative offers. Speaking engagements were thrown at his feet like offerings at an altar. Tasha grinned across his desk, scrolling through an endless stream of inquiries. "You're hot right now," she said, half joking. "Everyone suddenly remembers your phone number." Darius gave a humorless chuckle, tossing a stress ball between his hands. "They love you," he said, "until they don't." And he was right. Because beneath the glitter of opportunity, there was another flood rising, a darker, colder one. Two longtime corporate partners quietly pulled out, citing vague concerns about reputation management. A prestigious tech summit rescinded his keynote invite without so much as a phone call. On social media, a vocal minority attacked him with a viciousness he hadn't seen coming. Race baiter, entitled fraud. Built his whole brand on playing the victim card. But the worst wasn't public. It came in private. The first death threat arrived as an email, riddled with bile and misspelled rage. Then another, and another. A phone call in the dead of night, nothing but breathing on the other end. And one morning, outside Innova's headquarters, security found a package. Unmarked, heavy, unsettling. Inside a single sheet of paper, the word "enough" printed in thick, angry strokes. Tasha read the note, her hands trembling despite herself. "You need security," she said, her voice tight, urgent. Darius didn't argue. He just stared out the window of his office, watching the Los Angeles skyline blur against the setting sun. Success had always come with obstacles, but now it came with crosshairs. He thought about everything he had worked for. The late nights, the relentless grind, the sacrifices no resume could capture. And now, when he finally stood in the light, they wanted to drag him back into the shadows with fear. But fear had no place in him anymore. Not after what he had survived. Not after what he had built. He picked up the threatening note, turned it over in his hands once, then calmly fed it through the shredder. It hissed and disappeared into nothing. "This," he said quietly to Tasha, "only means we're exactly where we're supposed to be. Because when the system feels threatened, it doesn't whisper, it roars." And Darius Bell wasn't going to flinch. He had survived the fire once. Now he was the fire. By the third morning, the chaos had not subsided. It had evolved. Darius Bell sat alone in his corner office, high above the humming streets of downtown Los Angeles, staring out at the endless grid of the city. His reflection in the glass looked older somehow, more battle-worn, more dangerous. The storm he unleashed wasn't passing, it was growing, and now it demanded a response. Tasha entered quietly, a slim folder clutched in her hand. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes, sharp, assessing, betrayed the weight of what she was carrying. "They sent an offer," she said, setting the folder on his desk. "A network. Big one." Darius raised an eyebrow but didn't move. He waited. Tasha hesitated, then continued. They want you to do a televised special, prime time, a full, in-depth conversation about race, business, and the American system. The room seemed to still around them. It was the kind of opportunity that didn't just come once in a lifetime, it came once in several lifetimes. A chance not just to defend himself, but to reshape the narrative entirely. No sound bites, no ambushes, a platform. But Darius knew better than to be flattered. "What's the catch?" he asked finally, voice low. Tasha flipped open the folder, scanning the network's carefully worded proposal. "Creative direction, editorial oversight, final approval of cuts," she said, grimacing. "In short, they want the story, but they still want to control how it's told." Darius leaned back, steepling his fingers under his chin. The city below sprawled like a living organism, buzzing, restless, hungry. They didn't want a conversation. They wanted containment. They wanted to turn his fire into flickering candles they could blow out at will. He thought about it for a long moment. He could walk away, fade back into the boardrooms and contracts, let the moment die, or he could step into the fire, and this time, set the terms. Slowly, Darius pushed the folder aside and met Tasha's gaze head on. "Tell them I'll do it," he said, his voice steady, his decision absolute. Tasha blinked. "On their terms?" "No," he said, a faint smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "On mine." A slow, electric current of energy filled the room. "I control the questions. I control the edits. No script, no filters, no half-truths," Darius said, his voice gaining momentum. "They want my voice? They get it. Uncut, unchained, and unafraid." Tasha's lips curved into a grin, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "They're not going to know what hit them." Darius turned back to the window, the city lights starting to flicker on one by one, like signals in the gathering dusk. "Good," he said, because Darius Bell wasn't interested in playing by the old rules anymore. He was here to write new ones. And this time, they were going to hear every word. The story of Darius Bell was never just about a man. It was never just about a contract or a company or even a viral moment caught in the heat of live television. It was about something deeper, something the country had tried for too long to ignore. It was about the truth. When Darius looked into the camera that morning on the Morning Exchange, he didn't just defend his own success. He peeled back the polished facade of meritocracy that America loved to parade. He forced a reckoning, not with shouting or rage, but with calm, blistering honesty, an honesty that made even the most comfortable viewers shift uneasily in their chairs. Because the truth was this: in America, success had never been handed out by pure merit alone. It had been paved over generations, inherited through networks, protected by invisible gates few were ever allowed to approach, let alone pass through. Darius Bell didn't ask for permission. He didn't apologize for standing at the table. And he damn sure wasn't going to allow anyone to label him an exception, a trophy to wave around when convenient and dismiss when uncomfortable. He was proof of what could happen when a brilliant black mind refused to bow to the silent barriers. But more importantly, he was a reminder of how many others never got the chance to even stand where he stood. Not because they weren't talented enough or driven enough, but because the system was built to grind them down long before they could rise. In the days that followed his viral moment, America debated Darius Bell. Was he brave? Was he bitter? Was he a hero? Or just another angry voice? But the labels missed the point entirely. Darius wasn't asking to be seen as a symbol of rare triumph. He was demanding to be seen as normal. Not an outlier, not a quota, not a stroke of luck. Just another entrepreneur who had built something extraordinary, no more, no less, and who deserved the same unquestioned legitimacy afforded to those who didn't have to fight for it. His story was a crack in the dam, a flash of light cutting through a comfortable lie. And though plenty tried to dismiss him, diminish him, or bury him under waves of backlash, the message had already broken free. It wasn't about celebrating the few who made it. It was about dismantling the walls that kept so many from even trying. Darius Bell hadn't just stepped into history. He had dared to rewrite the story altogether. And now America had a choice. Keep pretending the fire wasn't real, or finally, truly, start putting it out.